Mia was just a normal girl with big dreams, until she became an innocent victim caught in the deadly crossfire between two ruthless drug gangs tearing her quiet neighborhood apart. What started as a battle for control quickly spiraled into a shocking story of betrayal, hidden alliances, and a price no one expected to pay. In a small town nestled just outside the bustling city, there was a neighborhood known for its quiet streets and friendly faces. The kind of place where everyone waved hello, kids played freely until dusk, and families trusted one another. It was a community that prided itself on safety and peace, a place where people felt secure leaving their doors unlocked and windows open. This neighborhood, with its tree-lined sidewalks and modest homes, had long been a refuge from the chaos of the city nearby. But beneath the surface of this calm environment, a storm was quietly brewing, one that would soon shatter the neighborhood's peaceful facade. For years, the neighborhood had remained untouched by the rising tide of gang violence spreading across other parts of the city. But that changed when two drug gangs, both desperate to expand their control, set their sights on this quiet pocket of the world. These gangs were not the type that openly displayed their power with loud confrontations or flashy displays. Instead, they operated in the shadows, weaving their influence into the community like a slow poison. At first, their presence was barely noticeable. Small exchanges here, quick meetings there, subtle warnings left unspoken. Residents went about their daily lives unaware of the dangerous game being played just beyond their front doors. As the months passed, the gang's desire to control the neighborhood's drug trade grew stronger. Each group claimed different sections of the area, setting invisible boundaries marked by fear and violence. What started as minor disagreements soon escalated into open threats. Windows were smashed, cars were set on fire, and graffiti marked the streets with gang symbols that once seemed out of place in such a peaceful neighborhood. The once welcoming community began to feel unsafe. Parents kept their children inside, neighbors stopped talking to each other, and a shadow of fear settled over the streets. But the gangs didn't care about the damage they were causing. For them, the neighborhood was just another prize to be won, a market to be controlled and exploited. They saw the quiet streets as an opportunity, a chance to make money and power without the heavy police presence found in other parts of the city. Each gang sent out scouts, recruited new members from the area's vulnerable youth, and engaged in a dangerous game of one-upmanship that only deepened the divide between them. The community, once united, was slowly torn apart. Families who had lived side by side for generations now found themselves caught between the warring factions, unsure of whom to trust or how to protect themselves. It was a time of uncertainty and growing tension, where every day held the possibility of violence breaking out without warning. The peaceful neighborhood had become a battleground, and no one was safe, not even the innocent. Amid this turmoil, life for the residents would never be the same again. The seeds of conflict planted by these two ruthless gangs were about to grow into something far more dangerous, and the price for the neighborhood's silence would soon become heartbreakingly clear. The two gangs that descended on the quiet neighborhood were very different in their origins and ways, but both were equally determined to control the streets and the drug trade that promised power and money. One gang, known simply as the Hawks, was led by a man named Marcus. Marcus had a reputation for being ruthless and fearless, a leader who believed in showing strength through violence. He built his group through intimidation and brutal enforcement, making sure everyone knew that crossing the Hawks meant serious consequences. His gang operated with strict rules and discipline, and they were quick to use force to settle disputes or send warnings. Marcus's goal was clear: absolute dominance over the neighborhood's drug business. On the other side were the Vipers, led by a man named Leon. Unlike Marcus, Leon was known for being cunning and strategic. He avoided unnecessary violence when possible, preferring to use manipulation and alliances to strengthen his hold. Leon's approach was to infiltrate the community and build influence quietly, recruiting young people with promises of protection and money. His gang was less about brute force and more about control through fear masked as loyalty. Leon knew that winning over hearts and minds could be just as powerful as guns. His vision was to outsmart his rivals and take over the drug market with calculated moves rather than open warfare, at least for now. Both gangs understood that controlling this neighborhood was more than just about drugs. It was about respect, influence, and survival. The neighborhood was strategically important. It was close to major highways and served as a perfect spot for distributing drugs to nearby areas. Whoever controlled it would have a strong foothold in the city's drug trade network. This made the stakes incredibly high and left little room for compromise. The gangs started to carve the neighborhood into territories, marking invisible borders that only those involved truly understood. The Hawks claimed the eastern side, a section with busy streets and several apartment complexes, while the Vipers controlled the west, where the houses were mostly single-family homes and small parks. Between them was a thin strip of no man's land, a place of uncertainty and constant danger where confrontations often happened. As both gangs expanded their influence, they began recruiting heavily from the neighborhood's youth. Vulnerable teenagers were drawn in by promises of money, power, and a sense of belonging they couldn't find elsewhere. Some joined willingly, while others felt forced by threats and pressure. Schools and community centers, once full of hope, now became places shadowed by fear and suspicion. Parents grew increasingly worried as their children disappeared into a world they didn't understand. The gangs also used local businesses as fronts for their operations, forcing owners to cooperate or face consequences. Some business owners complied out of fear, while others tried to resist, but quickly realized they were powerless. The once vibrant neighborhood economy began to change, as more money flowed into illegal activities and less into legitimate growth. With each passing day, the rivalry intensified. Skirmishes and threats became common. The stakes grew higher, and the neighborhood found itself caught in the middle of a war. Neither side was willing to back down from. It was only a matter of time before this battle for control turned deadly. Mia was just like any other 14-year-old girl in the neighborhood. She loved playing soccer with her friends in the park and dreamed of one day becoming a nurse, helping people and making a difference. Mia's family had lived in the neighborhood for years, and she knew most of the people around her. Her life was simple and full of normal teenage hopes and worries. She was careful to stay away from the growing tensions that gripped the community, knowing that the gangs were dangerous and not wanting any part of their world. Mia's house was near the invisible line dividing the two gangs' territories, though she never thought much about it. To her, the neighborhood was still home, the place where she felt safe and loved. Her parents worked hard to provide for her and her younger brother, and they tried their best to shelter their children from the violence creeping into their streets. But as the gang rivalry grew more intense, the quiet boundaries Mia once took for granted began to blur. At school, Mia was known as a bright and kind student. She was careful not to get involved with any of the trouble around her. While some of her classmates were drawn into the gangs, Mia stayed focused on her studies and her soccer team. Still, even she could feel the tension in the air. Teachers would warn students to be careful, and there were rumors about fights and threats that made everyone uneasy. The safe bubble that Mia and others once lived in was slowly breaking. Despite the fear surrounding her, Mia tried to live her life as normally as possible. She went to practice, hung out with friends, and dreamed of a future far away from the violence. Her parents reminded her to stay vigilant, but they never imagined that their daughter would become a victim of something so cruel and senseless. The gangs didn't seem to care who got hurt as long as their message was sent and their control remained unchallenged. Mia's innocence made her invisible to the gangs, or so it seemed. She wasn't involved in any gang activities, nor was she connected to anyone who was. Yet her proximity to the disputed territory put her in a dangerous position. The neighborhood was no longer a safe place for children like her. The escalating war between the Hawks and the Vipers meant that no one was truly out of harm's way. As the months passed, the gang violence spilled into places where it never belonged. Streets where families lived, parks where children played, and corners where neighbors gathered. The quiet neighborhood Mia loved was changing fast. Fear was replacing trust, and the shadows of the gangs grew longer with each passing day. Mia remained hopeful though, holding on to the belief that the violence would end, and her neighborhood would be safe again. But fate had other plans. Her life, filled with promise and dreams, was about to be tragically caught in the crossfire of a war she never chose to be part of. One night, the tension that had been building quietly for months suddenly exploded into violence. It started with a single gunshot, sharp and sudden, breaking the stillness of the neighborhood streets. What followed was a rapid and terrifying series of events that no one in the community would ever forget. A fierce shootout erupted between the two rival gangs, the Hawks and the Vipers, right in the heart of the neighborhood. The sound of gunfire echoed through the narrow streets, bouncing off walls and shattering windows. Cars were hit, some abandoned, and others still driving, as bullets flew wildly in all directions. People inside their homes huddled together, hearts pounding, unsure if the violence would reach them next. The streetlights flickered as the chaos unfolded beneath their glow, and the once peaceful neighborhood felt more like a war zone than a place to call home. The shootout was not a simple clash. It was a planned attack, born from months of simmering hatred and retaliation. Both gangs had grown bolder, no longer afraid to show their strength openly. The Hawks had tried to move into a part of the Vipers' territory, hoping to claim a key corner for drug sales. In response, the Vipers struck back with a violent counterattack. What began as a battle for control quickly spiraled out of control, with innocent residents caught in the middle. Neighbors who had lived side by side for years were forced to stay silent, fearing that any involvement might bring more danger to their doorsteps. Police sirens wailed in the distance, but by the time officers arrived, the gangs had scattered into the shadows. No one saw exactly who fired the first shot or who caused the most damage. Witnesses were scared, unwilling to talk, or simply too shocked to remember clearly. The gangs maintained their silence, bound by fear and loyalty, making it nearly impossible for the police to gather information. The aftermath of the shootout left a trail of destruction. Storefronts were damaged, cars were riddled with bullet holes, and shattered glass covered the streets. Families emerged cautiously from their homes to assess the damage, finding that their quiet neighborhood had been forever changed in a single night. The sense of safety that once existed was shattered, replaced by fear and uncertainty. For many residents, the shooting was a terrifying wake-up call. They realized that the gang rivalry was no longer hidden or distant. It had become a dangerous, everyday reality. Parents worried about their children, businesses feared losing customers, and the community's trust began to crumble. The police stepped up their presence, but without cooperation from the gangs or the community, progress was slow. The shootout was only the beginning of a new, darker chapter for the neighborhood. The battle for control was no longer secret. It was out in the open, and the consequences were more devastating than anyone had imagined. The quiet streets would never be the same again. In the middle of the growing chaos, something unexpected began to happen. A small group of members from both gangs, tired of the endless violence, started meeting in secret. These individuals were not the leaders but lower-ranking members who had witnessed the destruction firsthand. They had families, friends, and hopes beyond the gang life, and they wanted to find a way to stop the bloodshed before it tore the neighborhood apart completely. These secret meetings were risky. Both the Hawks and the Vipers operated on strict rules that forbade cooperation with the enemy. Anyone caught talking to the rival gang risked severe punishment, or worse. Yet, despite the danger, these members met quietly in hidden places, abandoned buildings, back alleys, and even empty lots where no one would suspect a truce was being discussed. The goal was simple: find common ground and negotiate a ceasefire to end the violence. They spoke about how the fighting was hurting everyone, especially innocent people who had nothing to do with the gang rivalry. Some shared personal stories of loss, pain, and regret, hoping that their leaders would listen if they brought these stories back. The idea was to find a way to control the drug trade without endless fighting, to rebuild some sense of peace in their neighborhood. Though the talks were fragile and filled with suspicion, they gave a glimpse of hope. The members involved believed that the gangs could find a way to coexist, or at least avoid spilling innocent blood. They hoped that if they could convince their leaders, the community might finally breathe easier. However, these secret negotiations were far from simple. Many gang members opposed any peace efforts, seeing them as a sign of weakness. Some feared losing power or money if the war ended. There were also deep-rooted grudges and rivalries that could not be easily forgotten. The atmosphere was tense and trust was scarce. Despite the difficulties, the group pushed forward. They knew that if the fighting continued, more innocent lives would be at risk. Their motivation was not just about stopping the violence, but also about protecting the neighborhood they called home. They wanted to prevent the destruction of everything they had once valued. Unfortunately, this secret alliance was fragile. It depended on silence, trust, and goodwill, things hard to come by in a world built on fear and betrayal. While some were genuinely committed to peace, others saw an opportunity to use the talks for their own advantage. The delicate balance of power within the gangs meant that any wrong move could destroy the fragile truce before it even began. As the neighborhood watched the violence escalate, unaware of these hidden efforts, the secret meetings continued quietly. They offered hope, but also risked making the situation even more dangerous. Because in a world ruled by distrust, even the best intentions could lead to unexpected consequences. Just as the fragile hope of peace began to take root, betrayal struck with a force that no one expected. The secret alliance as a sign of weakness. Some feared losing power or money if the war ended. There were also deep-rooted grudges and rivalries that could not be easily forgotten. The atmosphere was tense and trust was scarce. Despite the difficulties, the group pushed forward. They knew that if the fighting continued, more innocent lives would be at risk. Their motivation was not just about stopping the violence, but also about protecting the neighborhood they called home. They wanted to prevent the destruction of everything they had once valued. Unfortunately, this secret alliance was fragile. It depended on silence, trust, and goodwill, things hard to come by in a world built on fear and betrayal. While some were genuinely committed to peace, others saw an opportunity to use the talks for their own advantage. The delicate balance of power within the gangs meant that any wrong move could destroy the fragile truce before it even began. As the neighborhood watched the violence escalate, unaware of these hidden efforts, the secret meetings continued quietly. They offered hope, but also risked making the situation even more dangerous. Because in a world ruled by distrust, even the best intentions could lead to unexpected consequences. Just as the fragile hope of peace began to take root, betrayal struck with a force that no one expected. The secret alliance between members of the Hawks and the Vipers, which had offered a glimpse of an end to the violence, was shattered from within. Someone close to the negotiations, someone trusted, betrayed the group by leaking details of the secret meetings to a rival faction within one of the gangs. This betrayal wasn't just a careless mistake. It was a calculated move to sabotage the peace effort and maintain control through fear and chaos. The leak sent shockwaves through both gangs. Leaders who had been wary but willing to listen suddenly saw the secret talks as a threat to their power. For them, peace meant losing influence, money, and respect. They believed the only way to keep control was to double down on violence and intimidation. The fragile trust that had begun to form dissolved almost overnight, replaced by suspicion and anger. The betrayal created a dangerous ripple effect. Members of the secret alliance were now seen as traitors by their own gangs. Some faced harsh punishment, including beatings and threats, while others disappeared without explanation. The message was clear: any attempt at peace would be crushed mercilessly. The once hidden talks became a weapon used to fuel the fire between the Hawks and the Vipers. As the gangs spiraled back into conflict, the violence escalated beyond anything the neighborhood had seen before. The already tense streets became battlegrounds filled with fear and uncertainty. The betrayal had not only ended the hope for peace, but made the rivalry more dangerous. The gangs became even more ruthless, eager to prove their strength and punish those who tried to change the course of the war. Loyalties were tested, and trust became a rare commodity. Even among close friends and family, doubt crept in. People wondered who might be working against them or feeding information to the other side. This paranoia tore through the gangs and the community, making it nearly impossible to tell friend from foe. The betrayal also caught the attention of the police, who saw it as both a setback and an opportunity. While the violence increased, officers believed that the chaos might reveal weaknesses in the gang's structure. They intensified their investigations, hoping to find leads from the fractures caused by the betrayal. But the gangs were quick to adapt, tightening their security and becoming more secretive than ever. For the neighborhood, the consequences were devastating. The fragile peace they had hoped for was replaced by a new wave of violence, suspicion, and fear. The betrayal turned what could have been a chance for healing into a deeper wound. The community found itself caught once again in a deadly war, one where trust was broken, alliances shifted, and the price of loyalty became unbearably high. One quiet evening, the neighborhood's fragile peace shattered in the most tragic way imaginable. A drive-by shooting meant to send a deadly message from one gang to the other turned into a nightmare that no one could have predicted. The intended target was a high-ranking member of the Hawks, known for leading several violent attacks against the Vipers. But instead of hitting their enemy, the bullets struck someone completely innocent, a young girl named Mia. Mia was walking home from soccer practice, carrying her backpack and dreaming of a better future. She never imagined that the violence tearing through her neighborhood would touch her life so directly. As the car sped down the street, shots rang out, cutting through the calm evening air. One bullet missed its intended mark and struck Mia instead. The impact was immediate and devastating. Neighbors rushed out of their homes, horrified by what had happened. Panic spread quickly as people tried to help, but it was clear that Mia's injuries were severe. Emergency services arrived swiftly, but despite their efforts, Mia's life hung in the balance. The community was shaken to its core. This innocent girl, who had done nothing to deserve harm, had become the tragic victim of a violent war that wasn't hers. The news of Mia's shooting spread like wildfire. Families who had tried to keep their heads down suddenly faced the harsh reality that no one was safe anymore. The incident ignited a wave of grief and anger, but also fear. Parents kept their children indoors, and the streets grew empty. The neighborhood's sense of security, already fragile, was broken beyond repair. The gangs reacted quickly, each blaming the other for the tragic mistake. The Hawks accused the Vipers of recklessness, while the Vipers claimed they had no intention of harming anyone outside the fight. But for most residents, these arguments felt meaningless. The real victim was Mia, a young girl whose life was stolen in an instant by forces beyond her control. The shooting forced the community to confront the true cost of the gang rivalry. It was no longer just about territory or money. It was about human lives, families, and futures destroyed. For many, Mia's tragedy became a turning point, a painful reminder of how the violence could touch anyone, regardless of their choices or innocence. Local leaders and activists called for peace, hoping Mia's story would inspire change. But the gangs, fueled by anger and retaliation, were not ready to back down. The neighborhood stood at a crossroads, caught between the desire for safety and the harsh reality of ongoing conflict. Mia's shooting was more than just a tragic accident. It was a symbol of the neighborhood's struggle. It exposed the devastating consequences of a war waged in silence, a war that had finally claimed an innocent life. The community's heart broke that night, and the fight for peace became more urgent than ever. The shooting that took Mia's life sparked a wave of urgency within the police department. Officers knew they had to act quickly to find those responsible and bring justice to the grieving community. But the investigation proved far more difficult than anyone had anticipated. The neighborhood was closed off, wrapped in fear and silence. Witnesses were reluctant to come forward, afraid that speaking out would bring deadly consequences from the gangs. The walls of secrecy seemed impenetrable. Detectives worked tirelessly, piecing together clues from the chaotic night of the shooting. They collected forensic evidence, interviewed neighbors who had seen or heard something, and analyzed surveillance footage from nearby businesses. But each lead seemed to hit a dead end. The gangs operated with a strict code of silence, and many residents were unwilling or too scared to betray that unwritten rule. As the investigation continued, officers uncovered more than just gang rivalry. They discovered hidden alliances, betrayals, and double crosses that complicated the case. Some gang members were playing both sides, secretly cooperating with rivals for personal gain. Others had their own agendas, making the conflict far more tangled than a simple fight over territory. The detectives also faced challenges within their own ranks. Rumors began to surface about possible corruption or connections between some offices and gang members. This created tension and mistrust, making the investigation even harder. Honest officers feared their efforts would be undermined, while the community grew skeptical of law enforcement's ability to protect them. Slowly, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The investigation revealed that Mia's death was not just a tragic accident. It was linked to a secret deal gone wrong between the gangs. A shipment of drugs had been intercepted, and tensions flared over who was responsible. The drive-by shooting was intended as a message, but the plan had failed with devastating consequences. As the truth came to light, the police identified key suspects involved in the shooting. But bringing them to justice was a delicate process. The gangs were ruthless, and any move by law enforcement risked triggering further violence. The detectives had to balance the need for action with the safety of the community. Throughout the investigation, the neighborhood watched anxiously. Mia's family and friends hoped for answers, but feared retaliation. The community's trust in the police wavered, as progress seemed slow, yet the officers remained determined to uncover the truth. The investigation into Mia's death exposed the complex web of violence, betrayal, and hidden motives that fueled the gang war. It showed that behind the public fight were deeper, darker secrets that made the path to justice difficult and dangerous. But for those seeking peace, uncovering these truths was the only way forward. As the investigation unfolded, a surprising twist shook the entire neighborhood and challenged everything people thought they knew about the gangs and their rivalry. It turned out that some members of the Hawks and the Vipers had been secretly working together in a hidden alliance, one that went far beyond the drug trade and violence seen on the surface. This unexpected partnership was a carefully planned scheme to manipulate the gang's conflict for personal gain. The alliance had been orchestrated by a small group of influential figures within both gangs who saw the turf war as an opportunity to eliminate rivals and consolidate power. Instead of trying to stop the violence, they encouraged it behind the scenes, knowing that the chaos would distract law enforcement and allow them to quietly expand their operations. They played both sides, fueling the conflict while secretly profiting from drug shipments and illegal deals that crossed gang boundaries. This revelation shocked the community. For years, people believed the gangs were bitter enemies, locked in a battle for control. But in reality, some were cooperating to benefit themselves, using the rivalry as a cover to avoid detection and increase their wealth. It was a betrayal not only of the gang's members who wanted peace, but also of the entire neighborhood that had suffered from the violence. The police seized on this information, which became a crucial breakthrough in their investigation. By targeting the leaders of this secret alliance, law enforcement was able to disrupt the illegal operations and arrest key players who had stayed hidden for so long. The arrest sent a strong message that the gang's hidden games were no longer safe from justice. However, this twist also brought new dangers. The betrayed factions within the gangs were furious, and tensions flared as internal conflicts exploded. Some members felt they had been used as pawns and were determined to take revenge, leading to a wave of retaliatory violence. The neighborhood was thrown back into uncertainty, caught between shifting alliances and unpredictable outbreaks of conflict. For the community, this revelation was bittersweet. On one hand, it exposed the corruption and manipulation behind the violence, offering a clearer understanding of the problem. On the other hand, it revealed how deep the betrayal ran and how difficult it would be to rebuild trust. The quiet neighborhood was now forever marked by this complicated web of loyalty, deceit, and greed. Despite the chaos, some residents and local leaders saw hope in the truth being uncovered. They believed that shining a light on these hidden alliances could finally help the neighborhood heal and move toward peace. The path ahead was uncertain, but understanding the real enemy was a critical step toward reclaiming the community from the grip of violence and betrayal. In the months following the shocking revelations and arrests, the neighborhood faced a difficult road to recovery. The wounds left by the gang rivalry, the betrayals, and the tragic loss of innocent lives like Mia's ran deep. Families mourned, trust had been broken, and the fear that once silenced the community still lingered. But amid the darkness, small signs of hope began to emerge. Community leaders, activists, and residents started working together to heal the damage. They organized neighborhood meetings, outreach programs, and support groups to help